Ventures in Venture.
I can't fucking do that. Okay. I thought it was some audio thing. My chair just made a spoiling noise. Wait, are we actually, do I just start? Is that what it is? Okay. Welcome to Adventures in Venture, where we talk about how developments in technology, business and science can be harnessed to create positive change in the world. On this podcast, I aim to help people understand how they can create positive change by looking at and deconstructing the habits and routines of the top performers in these areas. We'll be talking to people who have real-world experience of starting and growing technology ventures, as well as scientists, angel investors, entrepreneurs and venture capital investors. I'll also be talking about my own experience in raising a venture capital fund. So welcome, sit back and listen to the show.
Hello, I'm Gareth Mitchell, i.e. I'm not Evan. Yes, I've nabbed the presenter's chair for this one and Evan is in the interviewee's chair. It's my chance, it's our chance to hear more about Mr. Maindonald, about his background and his route into venture capital via a successful career in property development. Along the way, we'll talk about rock music and wine, always a good combination in my book. Evan is an entrepreneur, property expert, early-stage tech investor and managing partner of Hyperlight Ventures, a venture capital firm. And more importantly than any of that, Evan is proud father to Brian and Arthur. But they're not kids. Well, in a way, they are. Let's get Evan to explain. By the way, welcome to your own podcast, Evan. Tell me about Brian and Arthur.
Well, thank you, Millie. They're very hairy kids, actually, as it turns out. So, in fact, they're dogs. And in fact, this reflects my view of dogs. They're just very hairy people. So, yeah, Brian and Arthur are interesting because they're very handsome. They're Hungarian wire-haired Vizslers. But Brian, in particular, is a bit of a rock star. He has over 30,000 followers on Instagram. So I must admit that I've not posted any... Well, sorry, it's not me. It's him that does it, of course.
I was going to say,
he has not posted...
getting onto a smartphone.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
you
a
imagine?
Technique. You've trained them well anyway.
He's got an enormous tablet. It's about 70 feet long. It just stands on it.
Covered with like paw
70 feet.
prints all over the screen. Okay,
exactly
You're
that.
You're painting an idea. Yeah, so Brian, the cleverest dog in the world, worked out how to use Instagram.
Yeah.
And many followers.
Yeah, he's a star. He's amazing. People love him. They like watching him, run after his ball.
There will be people...
lick his balls.
Well,
did I just say that? No.
You just did. There'll be people listening to this thinking, wow, maybe there are lessons I could already learn from this podcast about how to build my social media profile. So what should they learn from Brian about building your social media?
Well,
run around chasing a ball, it seems like.
It's funny you should say that because the reason that... Okay, I'm going to come clean here because I have to. There's no other way I can explain this. The reason that I started Brian's Instagram social media accounts is because although I got on Facebook pretty much when it first started, I was never really a fan of social media. And, I'm the opposite of a Luddite. I'm somebody who's always... I started programming computers when I was 12 and I did a degree in computer science. I worked in the technology industry for some long time before I then started a property development and investment company, and technology is my first love. I kind of have now come back to that in deciding to focus initially on early stage angel investment and then starting Hyperlight Ventures, which is the venture capital firm that I run. Slight tangent, but the point I'm trying to make is I've always really been very interested in and enthusiastic about technology, but I never embraced social media when it first came out, because I suppose I'm not interested in putting myself out there, but on the other hand, you and I played in a band.
There is that.
So I used to get up on stage and sing. I know,
Evan, yeah.
but I just...
And you're doing this.
That's more, for me, about just doing what I like to do. But so I was like, why would I put pictures of myself or put things up? I don't feel like I have this huge need to have like this huge digital connection thing. And so anyway,
this seems to be before we go to your anyway, is that if I can put words into or a thought into your head about your attitude to it, is that maybe you think, like, supposing you've just cooked a meal and you could put it on Instagram, you just think, well, why would anybody care about me cooking that meal? But if this is networking as part of your professional network, then sure. Yeah, you've done property videos, you've launched a podcast. So that is for another reason, I suppose, than putting content out there. So perhaps you're thinking, hey, I've just cooked something, I've just been somewhere, I could tweet about it, who cares that I've just done this thing? Whereas if Brian does something that's a bit different. So carry on with your anyway. Yeah,
somebody might, it's funny, I'll come back to that anyway in just a sec if you don't mind. I know I'm hijacking your interview, but I think I've always been quite selective about who my friends are. I know if I like people, and there are certain people I really like and get on with. I just want to spend time with those people. I'm like you could say in life, I'm a maximizer. I like to really optimize and maximize the time I spend with people. So I'd like to make sure I spend it with only people I really enjoy spending time with. And so social media is a bit too kind of everyone for me. I don't really want everyone to know that I'm cooking a Thai green curry or whatever it is I'm doing. And so you're right. The thing that made me start with social media was because I realized that it was a useful tool for my business. And so the reason that I started putting pictures of Brian on Instagram, which you might think is a bit odd, is to test it. It was a test for me. And what I quickly found is that people really like handsome dogs. He's a very handsome dog, and he's funny. And it's interesting because, I suppose it underpins what I think is one of the, we've gone very quickly into this, one of the reasons or one of the ways in which people should leverage social media, having actually from that point learned a fair amount about it, and it is that the things that people watch or are interested in are things that either educate them or entertain them. That's, if you want people to follow you on social media, that's what you need to put up there. And in essence, if you think about what people who are famous do, and those people get paid to endorse things all the time, right? People listen to their endorsements when they endorse things because they spend a lot of time educating or entertaining people. I don't know, Tom Cruise, he's done lots of movies. Everyone knows who he is, so he endorses something, everyone's going to listen to what he says. If he hadn't done that, nobody would. Social media is the same. If you put out content that entertains or educates people, you build up a big following, then you've got multiple options as to how you leverage that following. And so I suppose that principle has a lot of business applications.
Yeah, and in fact, I did wonder if a part of Brian's Instagram account was as a bit of an experiment. So
it was exactly that, but it was an experiment.
Backed up my suspicion there.
No, you're right, but it was an experiment that I weirdly came to enjoy.
Yeah,
and the great thing about it is if you're a dog on social media, you can say what the hell you like. You can. And Brian's post would say, I had a great day licking my balls today, or whatever. Or, I sniffed this other dog's ass. Or just, the thing is, you don't have to be inhibited. You can say what the hell you like.
He shows his balls on Instagram. Doesn't get taken down, does it?
No,
brilliant.
Nobody cares. No, but it's the thing is that because nobody knew. Well, I suppose they do now. That it was me. I could just say what I wanted. I could be as silly as I wanted. I could say just whatever came into my head, and it was so free.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyways, that's Brian. And
what Brian thinks about it is probably another thing. But anyway, there you go.
He's into it. You can
cool.
tell.
Yeah.
And Arthur perhaps is the quiet one, but anyway, shout out to Arthur as well.
Yeah.
I want to find out a bit more about you now that we've heard about your dogs and your attitudes to social media and so on. So you are the son of a renowned mathematician and statistician. So is that where can we draw a line between your renowned mathematician and statistician father and the technological kind of road that you've travelled down?
Yeah, look, my father is a very intelligent man, a very smart guy. Very focused on what he does, very much a academic, and so it probably wouldn't surprise you based on what I've just said to know that he and I have quite vigorous arguments about our political views. If anything, he probably thinks I'm right-wing, although I don't think that.
Yeah, and he's just a typical lefty academic then, is he?
Yeah, it could be a bit like that. But we manage to have these arguments sometimes quite vigorously, but I do enjoy them because he is somebody, he really knows a lot. He's a very, very he reads a lot and he thinks a lot, and he knows a lot about maths. He would describe himself as a biometrician. He wrote a book called Statistical Computation that he dedicated to me and my sister. And I could not get past the first page. It had all these equations and derivatives and all sorts of things. It's certainly a textbook. He wrote another one, a textbook on a statistical language called R, which most people haven't heard of. But anyone who's in statistics would have heard of it. It is the world's leading computing language for dealing with statistical problems. Ironically, I study statistics at university as part of my computer science degree, and the guy that taught me was taught by my father, and I think I failed that paper, and I blame that on my dad.
Wow.
He clearly didn't do a very good job of teaching the guy right.
What did your dad say about that? Did he ever find out?
I don't think he liked it, yeah. Well, he did find out. But you know what? It's funny because although I certainly got my interest in science from my father, I don't think he and I are quite different people, and I think the tangents in which the directions in which my interests went were different. But yeah, he worked at the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research in Auckland when I was a kid, and I used to go up there to help him feed punch cards into the mainframe computer that they had. And he then bought a computer home when I was 12, a VIC-20, which bizarrely, as you know, is something that you and I share.
I had one myself.
Both of our fathers bought a VIC-20 home when we were 12, and we have this weird shared connection with Castle Coronian. That is so strange. Anyway, I just loved that. I started to program that computer. I used it to write programs. I taught myself how to use it. And so I think that is ultimately what led to me deciding to do a degree in computer science, ending up with a career in technology. I just found technology fascinating. My father actually, believe it or not, has been using the internet since the 70s. He's still alive. And so he used it when there was no graphical user interface, there was no World Wide Web.
He's a hardcore guy.
He is hardcore, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, I often wonder when people have renowned parents of any persuasion, but in your case,
well, he was renowned in a quite a
specific
narrow field
area.
I mean,
sure.
It's not like anyone he wouldn't have been known by anyone in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I'm sure he's an amazing and renowned guy, but people don't chase him down the street looking for a selfie with him, unless you are a statistics undergraduate or something.
Well, statistics undergraduates do. Yeah.
I know what they're like. Exactly, they're voracious. But when somebody has a renowned father, I often wonder what kind of pressure that brings, because my dad was no slouch. He did well, but he was, I don't think I'd say he was renowned. He was successful and an amazing guy. But you hear what I'm saying. I think what I'm leading up to is the extent to which did that put pressure on you? Are you going to fall into an easy stereotype of somebody who's done well because you're just trying to please your dad, really, is the blunt way of asking it?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But I will say this. When I grew up, I was very free in the way that I thought. I don't want to say that I didn't give a shit about anything, but nothing worried me. Worried me. I was not really concerned what people thought of me, and I don't think I ever have been particularly concerned about what people thought of me. I just sort of felt like, I suppose if I wanted to describe myself, I'd call myself a hedonist or a maximizer. I just sort of feel like I'm here to enjoy life, and I just want to get the most out of it.
All righty. So we've done a bit of your dad, and you've disappointed me by not giving me a heartbreaking answer about how this is all about just trying to please your dad, and he never approved of you.
It might be. Let's
keep going.
And, there is a bit of that. And there maybe is a bit of that.
Now we're talking, right?
But I think it's tempered by the fact that I really don't care that much what people think of me, if you understand what I mean.
It's a bit of a yes and no answer.
Indeed.
Okay. What about your mother then? A Welsh mother who comes from a place that we both know in Wales, in mid Wales, called Castle Coronian, and is... How, for one thing, silly question, how Welsh is your mum? Does she have a Welsh accent? She speaks Welsh all the time?
She's highly Welsh. So when I go, Ivan?
Oh, I love it. So proper Welsh accent. Because my dad was Welsh, but he didn't have much of a Welsh accent.
No, so she speaks Welsh.
Wow.
So she taught me to say things like Sidahi and various other Welsh words that I can't remember right now.
Taught you reasonably well.
Yeah. But no, she is extremely Welsh. She was born in Castle Coronian. She grew up there. Used to carry pails of milk across the field in the morning on snowy mornings to wherever she was going, school, I imagine. And I have a pretty rich lineage of Welsh cousins and ancestors. In fact, my great-great-grandfather was called Evan Evans, and I think it's probably difficult to be more Welsh than that.
It's lovely. That's quite a tendency in Wales for people just to not bother thinking of more than one name. So in the Gilsfield, the village where I lived for a long time, one of the best known guys in the village was Trevor.
It's just lazy.
I think it might be.
It indicates a lack of thought.
Sorry to say it. Imagine if you didn't like the name Trevor. And, if it was just your surname or your first name, maybe you could kind of live with it. But if that's literally that, and who knows, maybe it was his middle name as well. So Trevor.
Do you know any Dicks?
I know loads of them, but just not people who are called Dick. But that's a story for another day.
Okay.
But so we're having this lovely chat about Evan Evans, which I think is brilliant. But what else do we need to know about your mum? Like, what does she do? What did she do?
So my mum has a degree in botany, so she worked as a botanist. And little known fact, very sort of strange, but my parents actually met in Pakistan, believe it or not.
I'm believing it. So I'm assuming that must have been something academic related then?
Yeah,
both
in a
academics.
way.
Was it at some conference? But then why would a botanist be at a statistics conference? Either way, so how did they meet in Pakistan?
They were teaching, but they were both teaching for the church. So my father was teaching maths, and I believe my mum was teaching English, but I don't know. I wasn't around at the time, as you might imagine. It's funny though. My parents have. Maybe it's not funny. My parents have always had a very international outlook. I suppose it would be hard to imagine anything else from two people who come from opposite sides of the globe and met somewhere in Asia. But so when I grew up, we always had people from all over the world at the house, just different people from different places, and I think in many ways that's probably formed my view of the world and the way that I kind of think. I love travelling and I love seeing new and different places. I think it really kind of opens your mind, and it opens your mind and it frees your heart in a way. I'd never feel so inspired as I do when I'm travelling. Well, if I stay in one place for too long, I just have to move. But I think that comes from that experience of growing up where I was just exposed to all sorts of different cultures, and my parents have always been very open to that and welcomed it. And I kind of, when I was young, thought that was a bit weird initially, but I warmed to it. We had this guy come and stay with us from China called Mr. Moo. He was cool.
Tell me about Mr. Moo.
Well, he was, I think, from Shanghai. My dad met him at some conference in China, and then he just came and stayed at our house. And he was like the guy in Mr. Miyake, the guy in the what was that movie called? The one about the guy who learns the one who learns to I've got the Karate Kid. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was this wise old Chinese guy, and he took a huge interest in everything that I was doing. His English wasn't perfect, but I would be like, I used to play with cars when I was a kid. I used to like pull cars to pieces and repair them. He would come and help me repair the car. I was like 15, this guy was like 60 or something. He'd be lying underneath the car talking to me. I'd be talking to him about a crankshaft. He'd be like, it was extremely funny. He was just great. I love the guy.
Yeah, sure. So that paints a bit of a picture of what your upbringing was like. So what I'm getting the impression of is that you are kind of this like super bright, kind of nerdy, but not giving too much of a shit kind of kid. Like, were you naughty, for instance, or... I bet you were. You must have been a handful.
I would have been. I mean, my sister says I was a cute kid. It's hard to have perspective on yourself. My sister says that I was a cute kid, but yeah, I was quite rebellious. I kind of did what I want, and I still sort of probably do what I want. I'm very independent minded. I think that's probably nature rather than nurture. Always quite nonconformist. In fact, for a long period of time, I don't even know how long, from probably when I was about maybe 8 or 9 or something, I wore different coloured socks for a period of about 10 years, and they were usually fluorescent. And I think I got that off it was either Spandau Ballet or Duran Duran or some rock video that I was watching, where I think it was Wham actually. I think it was George Michael,
Andrew Ridgeley.
Andrew Ridgeley in some Wham video was wearing different coloured fluorescent socks. I saw that. I was like, that's what I want. And I just did that. And everyone was like, why do you never wear the same coloured socks? I was like, because I don't.
I love that mode of rebellion. It could have been, like when I was a kid, I used to smash up bus shelters and beat people up.
I wasn't like a smasher or a beater.
No, exactly. I just wore different coloured socks. Yeah. But nonetheless, it was like a little example.
It was a very nerdy
kind of
non-conformism.
The way that you think, still do, yeah.
I was not one of the cool kids at school,
and you probably didn't try.
No, I didn't. No, I really didn't care.
Yeah.
I was quite nerdy. I was, played chess, but I was a bit sporty. I played tennis. I tried to play rugby, but rugby in New Zealand, oh my God! I mean, you get all these huge Polynesian guys, and when you end up at the bottom of a pile of them that are they're very heavy, it's incredibly painful. I imagine playing rugby in England is easier but I don't know. Perhaps it's not.
Yeah, it's not something I've dabbled with since high school, but nonetheless.
But the thing, I would try anything.
We have intact noses. No, I wouldn't put it past you.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's keep
I would try anything, but I would give up very quickly if it was too hard work or too painful.
All right. Yes, that's just called common sense.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's move on then, because we've only so far got as far as you being 16 years old, which is when didn't you go to university when you were 16?
Yeah, I did.
What? Was that how it was in New Zealand? Because in most normal places you go when you're about 18 or 19.
Yeah, no, that is about normal in New Zealand as well.
So how? Okay, so two academic parents, they must have pushed you pretty hard. You were very bright. You loved your Vic 20, so I can see that how that happened. But so this question isn't so much like, oh wow, you were so young going to university, you must have worked really hard, or maybe you're really brainy. This is more of a question about what it was like being at university as presumably the youngest person on campus.
Well, I was, but I want to just say something about that. My academic record in school was not pristine. I think ultimately, and it probably reflects my personality, when I was interested in things, I was good at them. I wanted, when I really wanted to do it and I worked hard at it, I was good at it. When I wasn't interested, I didn't. So actually, in third form, which I guess is probably similar to the third form you have here in terms of the stage in school, I was in the top class, but I was at the bottom of the top class. And my parents were talking about putting me back a year because they were so concerned about my academic performance. And then, I don't know whether that motivated me or not, but at some point in the following year, I just started taking an interest in certain things. I started taking an interest in quantum physics, in maths, and accounting, just all sorts of. I started reading books. I don't know why I did it. I just did. I had a few friends who maybe it was part of the nerdiness thing. We used to talk about this stuff, and so I was reading about things that were quite advanced for my age, and so I then, because I'd taken this interest in things, and by the way, it was only certain subjects. I was good at maths. I was good at physics. My English was rubbish. But it's because I wasn't that interested in it. I didn't know why it was useful. I mean, strangely, languages were probably my worst subject at school. But I now speak 3 of them at least fairly well. I mean, apart from English. So
a New Zealander.
Well, I do well with things when I want to do well with things, and that really is a reflection of how I ended up at university at 16. I just studied. I got bored with what my class was studying. I started studying the next year's things. I just started reading all these books, and then I did the school certificate exam, which is the exam you normally do in Form 5. I did that in Form 4, so I did that a year early. I passed it, and then I did the university entrance exam a year early, and so I think one of the reasons my parents were thinking of putting me back is I was already young for my year. Just really the timing of probably when I went into school. So I did that university entrance exam. I came back to school thinking I'm gonna do my 7th form, and then I started studying, because you can do a 7th form and then go into university. You don't have to. Most people do. I started studying. I was like, I've done all this stuff. There's nothing for me here. And so I did this last minute application to university. Computer science was the only course that was available. I was like, I'm going to do that. Awesome. And then annoyingly, here's the thing, right? My parents said, oh, you're at university now. You can start paying rent. I was like, what? I do well, and you penalise me. Anyway, there you go.
No, sure. I can understand the economics of it if you'd actually left school at 16.
Well, it was irritating because I was like, if I'd stayed at school, you weren't going to make me pay rent. Now I'm at university, you're making me pay rent.
Well, they're no idiots, are they? Right. So that's where you got your business prowess from.
Perhaps.
So, all right. But what was
although I think my father would strongly resist the suggestion that he might be a businessman.
I suspect so. So I'm glad you put that disclaimer in. Evan's dad, if you're listening, both of us retract that.
Yeah.
Now, but what I did want to know is, so you're at university, a good 2 years younger than most of the other people there. What was that? Was that weird, or were you just a bit kind of mature for your age, or how did that work? Because there is a difference, isn't there, between an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old?
In retrospect, I think I ended up going to university too young, because you're right. I had a great time, but I didn't have the discipline that was needed. And so, I did really well in my first year. My second year at university, and I think this is typical, second years are a lot harder than first years, and I struggled because I was just having a good time and being a bit silly. And so actually after my second year, I decided I'd take a break. I actually just put the university, you can do this in New Zealand, I don't know if you can do it in England. I took a year out. I went to work for a company called ANZF Freight, selling freight and courier services. And then I came back after I'd done that and finished the degree. So, I was too young. I hadn't learned the discipline that you needed at that point to focus on university. At school, you get told what to do. At university, you're suddenly in this environment where you can do what the hell you like. And so, maybe a bit like you going and drinking Guinness at the pub, I also sort of just,
you partook.
Yeah. But I think the thing is, in that second year when I failed a couple of papers, it hit me quite hard because I was used to at that point I was used to kind of acing everything I did and doing it really easily, and I realised actually, if you want to do this, you're going to have to do some work, mate. Yeah,
sure, okay. Yeah. Can we roll forward to 1992 when you landed for some strange reason in the UK? Why?
I was at a point in my life in New Zealand where I just decided that I needed to do one of three things. I needed to either buy a house and sort of settle down and start building some assets up, or I was going to travel. And I just decided I wanted to see the world, because if I didn't do it then, I thought I'm going to end up here for a long time, and my life will be over by the time I get to do that. It's sort of how I felt. And I'm really glad I did, because at that point I'd never left New Zealand, and I think my horizons would have been quite limited if I'd not just got out and started to see the world. So I actually came to the UK as part of what was supposed to be, I suppose, a round the world trip. I'd been to Canada on the way to stay I stayed in Banff in Canada for 3 months. Really interesting part of the world. Did a bit of snowboarding, and I landed in the UK, not really intending to stay. I thought I might and I might not. Anyway, I ran out of money, and I got a job. So because my mum's Welsh, I could stay here as long as I wanted to. I have an English passport now, but I got a job working for a computer company, and actually then I needed that to pay the rent because I'd run out of the money I'd saved in New Zealand. I then ended up applying for another job. I didn't know what the job was, actually. I just saw a job in the Sunday Times. I applied for it. Had a first interview. At that point, I didn't know who the company was. I went back to New Zealand, and I got a phone call from the person that I'd been staying with saying they want a second interview you for this job, and by the way, it's for British Telecom. And I was like, okay, I'm coming back. I'll come back for that. In New Zealand at the time, it was very hard to get a job working for a big blue chip international company. And so that was a great career opportunity for me. And I thought, why not? I'll jump on it.
All right. And we can talk now about the rock and roll years, which is it started around 93, 94, I think. You might correct me. But you were the front man in a band called Twice Naked in the end, but the initial name was Sweet Emotion. And I know that because I was your keyboard player for a while. There we were. You and me in Sweet Emotion.
Indeed. Well, I should just say, and I don't know if you're aware of this, that I was in a band at Auckland University called the Virgins, with
didn't know that.
a legendary chap called Hugh Devonish Mears II. And I'm pretty sure that the inspiration for Sweet Naked may have been something to do with the Virgins.
Right. I can see how there might be a connection there. So, did you form the band Sweet Emotion? Was it your idea?
My recollection is, do you remember a paper called Loot?
Yes.
Right. I think I responded to an advertisement in Loot for someone looking for a vocalist for a band. I don't know who placed it. Maybe it was Derek. Maybe it was Simon.
Drummer.
It was Derek.
Yeah, Simon was the very talented guitarist.
Oh, he's a bloody amazing bloke.
He was. I mean, you were good. Don't get me wrong, but Simon was the real talent.
Oh, I mean, I played guitar okay, but he played the guitar the way that I always aspired to play the guitar. I think in any field there are people who are naturally good at something and people who learn to do it. He was the former. He was somebody who just had a talent, and I think unless I'd started playing guitar at the age of 3 or just had some great great talent already built into me, I certainly could never play the guitar the way he could. He was incredible.
Few people
and also so humble.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's just such a lovely guy as well.
Yeah, so. I mean, I've met many guitar players who... Not many. I've met a few guitar players who can play that well, but most of the ones that play that well are super arrogant.
Yeah.
Because they know they're good.
Yeah.
He never knew how good he was.
No, totally. And we used to rehearse in a little recording or rehearsal space just under the arches, I remember, of like Putney Bridge Station. So... And I'd sometimes think, God, that's a pounding bass line, but of course it would be the district line going overhead. So anyway, I left the band to go to the Netherlands in '95. So, but enough about me, and almost enough about the band. Apart from, did you learn anything from being in the band? Was there anything about that experience that has stayed with you? You know, being the front man, being creative, working with other people, having just a right old laugh. I
learned a lot, many things, and many things that have stayed with me for my whole life, my whole career. I think one of the things I learned to do was just gave me the confidence to stand up on a stage and say things or do things. That wasn't all of it. I learned some more of those sort of social skills. I think I said to you, I did say when I was growing up, I was a bit of a nerd, and I wasn't. I've learned. I'm confident now, but I've learned that confidence, and I've learned it by doing things, by practicing things. I mean, there are some people who are naturally confident, but confidence is certainly a trait that you learn, and it gave me some degree of confidence to be able to stand up on a stage in front of people and perform. It taught me how to work with other people, and I did it because I really enjoyed it. After you left the band, we produced an album. We never released it, but it's still kicking around somewhere. And that was cool. And there's a really nice sense of achievement to that. But yeah, look, I learned so many things by doing that I still carry with me. And that kind of whole creativity thing is, I think it's got lots of applications for business. Yeah.
Well, it's right. Well, let's just go for that now, because I then want to move into where your property empire began. So we're going to go there. But all right. So you say there are lessons for business. And from being creative. So what is it? Just all that typical thinking outside the box kind of stuff, never taking no for an answer, trying hard. Where is the business lesson in that then?
There are lots of little things, I think, all of those things. But, when you're a band, you've got to work as a team. So it teaches you how to interact with other people, and, you can't just impose your will on other people. So you've got to learn the skill of persuasion, or learn how to express what you say. You're taking a creative endeavour and you're doing it with other people. That's not unlike a technology startup, actually. It's a small thing where you're trying to bring a team together and motivate them to deliver a thing. You're trying to work out what your product is. If you're a band, you're the style and what you're doing, and you have these creative differences. That's got us some great lessons for business.
Now, one of my memories of knowing you in the band, and of course we got to know each other socially after that as well, was that you were an early adopter of doing things like buying some property. And at that time, I was very much renting places, living with a girlfriend at the time. It did not occur to me.
I remember her.
You do? Yeah, Rebecca, absolutely.
I used to call her Bedwrecker, if you recall.
I do remember that. I think Rebecca remembers that as well, indeed. And and many of the people who would have been in earshot when the name Bedwrecker was being called out. Hopefully not in front of her parents.
No.
But so, but me and Rebecca shared for a while, renting, and then I moved on and lived on my own in various flat shares. But the point being, it took me until about 2000 or maybe 2001, 5 or 6 years later is what I'm saying, Evan, to even think of buying my first property. So when people like me and many of our age were just messing around and spending the money on just getting drunk or going on holiday or whatever, and you got this place in Hammersmith, and you were kind of young to do that. So where did that impulse come from?
It's funny, I sort of feel like I should have done it sooner. But I think at quite an early age, in fact, I remember being at university, probably being around about 16 at the time, thinking about this. I don't know why. I think I just came out of a finance class or something like that. But and there was another thing that kind of happened before that. My parents had bought a place in Auckland, and I think they paid like $30,000 for it. I mean, it's like quite a serious house, but they'd owned it for some years, and I just I'd asked them about how that worked, because I'd sort of had some idea that you get a loan to buy a house, a mortgage. I'd learned a bit about mortgages. So I thought, what if they paid $30,000 for this house and they got a mortgage at the time? I think maybe they put, I don't know, a couple of $1,000s into it. That doesn't sound very much, but it was probably a lot of money at the time. Maybe 5,000, I don't know. But I realised that house was now worth, I think, 300,000 or something. And I thought, well, so what happens? I think I asked my dad, do you pay the money? I was like, you just pay the mortgage off. So now you've got something that's worth 300,000. You put 5,000 into it, and you've paid off most of the mortgage. That sounds like a good deal. You basically made 300 grand out of 5 grand. How does that work? And he said, well, it's just property prices go up. So I had this in my head that you had this kind of thing where I just wanted to buy a property as soon as possible because I could see that that's something that would allow me to accumulate capital.
Yeah, and you learned about leveraging from a young
relatively
age.
passive way. And then when I went to university, I did some finance classes, and I think that helped solidify that and help me understand it properly. And so when I said to you earlier, I was thinking about buying a house or travelling, I think the reason I was thinking about buying a house was more around the fact that I knew it would be a great investment than that I wanted to settle down.
Yeah.
And I think the decision to travel was a reflection of the fact that I didn't really want to settle down. I wanted to, but I suppose I knew that if I did buy a house, I just wouldn't have the money to travel, and it would kind of keep me tied there. So one of the first things I wanted to do when I came to the UK was do that. I had this urgency about doing it as soon as possible, and as soon as I got the job at BT, I knew I had an income, so I could get a mortgage, and so I did start to save some money. But I borrowed the deposit for that first house I borrowed about 2/3 of it from my parents. So I paid them the money back with interest, but I did borrow it. And, I suppose that's a common way for people to buy a house. It was the bank of mum and dad type thing. But I always thought about it in a financial sense. And so that house was probably one of the best investments I ever made. I paid £135,000 for it, which is ridiculous because a house there now would cost you well over, I would have thought, a couple of million. I was living in a flat in Willesden Green at the time, and my rent was, I think, £500 a month. It'd probably be £2,000 a month these days, or more. I remember my mortgage on that house was I think £600 a month. I deliberately bought a house that had as many bedrooms as I could afford. So this house had 4 bedrooms. So I lived in 1 bedroom and I rented the other 3 out. And I think I got £500 a month for each bedroom. So basically, not only did I live there for free, but I had an income from the thing. And so I was then at a point where my mortgage was effectively paid. I had no rent, and I had an income beside the income from my job. And so because I was working in the tech industry, my income was pretty good. So it would put me in a great financial position. And I owned that house, I think, for about 3 years. And I sold it for I think, £210,000. And that built up a nice big lump that I then went on to use to buy other properties. So that was really how I got started in property. And the weird thing was, when I bought that house, this was like in 1994, it wasn't long after there'd been a property crash here. And so I just kind of had the feeling, post-crash, you want to be buying because the market will go up. That was my thought, and that was right at the time. I mean, and I didn't know it, but that's what I felt.
Yeah, buying against the market. Yeah.
The day I completed, my neighbour, I introduced myself to my neighbour, this older lady, and she said, "How much did you pay for that?" And I said, £135,000. She said, "Oh, you paid too much." I was like, but you know what? Even if that's true, and I don't think it was, it didn't matter.
The rest, as they say, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in how that purchase turned into more property, and then more property, and then even more property. But just pausing there for a moment about what this says about your character, because you said that this whole interview so far has been about these almost two sides of you that seem to rub along together very well and very successfully, which is the Evan, the not giving the shit guy, who wears differently opposing coloured socks just because what the heck, I'm going to do that. And then the Evan really thinking, this is an opportunity, I'm going to be sensible, I'm going to do this is my plan, I'm going to get this property, I'm going to do this with the rooms and so on. And I'm going to put it to you that attitude has stayed with you today, just hanging out with you. 1 minute you're being an absolute prick in a lovely way, you're just mucking around, just being, just like a big kid.
Yeah.
And then almost in an instant you're suddenly right, okay, now what are we going to do today? What's the purpose of this podcast? You need to do this thing, I want this to happen, and then what do you all think? And very much, and I see you oscillate in and out of those stages. You'll probably do it several times during this interview. Have I characterised you kindly there, appropriately? Is that how you see yourself? Are you even aware that you do that you seem to switch so well between those modes?
Yeah, no,
it seems to work for you.
I am. No, it does. I think it's a reflection of the fact that over the course of my life I've become very comfortable in my own skin. When I grew up, I used to have this very clear separation between business and personal life, and I think I needed it because in my personal life I was a bit crazy. Not crazy, but so for example, I had this job where I was selling computer systems, and I had to wear a suit and I had to look very corporate. The company that I worked for was an IBM reseller. So we were meeting with IBM guys, and you know what those guys are like. They're all in blue suits, and we sold Compaqs, and we sold, Novell computer systems. So I had to be this guy, and we were selling also sort of mini computer solutions to companies for their accounting systems and all sorts of stuff. So I had to present myself in a very formal and correct manner. Even us slightly relaxed New Zealanders have some formality in business. But in the weekends, I would just go out and party with my friends, and so I wanted to there's all sorts of things I wanted to do. One of the things I did was I got the sides of my head shaved, but this was my idea. I got them shaved, but my hair was long on top. And so in the weekends, I would gel my hair up so I could have this kind of like shaved sides of my head. My hair was gelled up, but during the week, the hair would fall over the side, so you couldn't actually see that it was shaved underneath. Anyway, one Friday night, I had this car I bought because I was making a lot of money actually for my age. I think I was making about $120,000 a year. I was kind of, I guess, in my early 20s or early 20s, and so I bought myself a nice car, and so I'd be out on the weekends. I would like slick my hair back, and then I have it shaved on the side. So I thought I was looking pretty cool, and so I had the keys to work where I worked, and I went in there to do something. I can't even remember what. Parked the car in the basement, had my hair slicked back, was wearing this kind of leather trench coat. It's like 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, and so I'm thinking there's going to be nobody here. Anyway, my boss comes in. His name is a guy called Jeff Olive. He walks in the door, he sees me, I'm at the water cooler getting a drink. He looks at my hair, it's like this look of disbelief on his face. He says, "On Monday, you're fired." And I was like, really? Yeah, that's what he said. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Did you get fired?
No, because I came in on Monday and my hair was down. Oh. And it was like, oh, you can't see it. It's like, oh, well, that's all right then.
So really, what we're discovering...
But anyway, my point is this. There were these two for a long time, and I had these two personalities. One was I was like in my private life, and the other one was what I was like in my business life. And at around about the age of 30, I think, or maybe a bit before, probably like late 20s, I reconciled those two things. And I think it was that I ended up, so I'd been in sales jobs, and I had this kind of, I found my confidence, and I just got to a point where I felt comfortable in bringing the two together, and I sort of ended up then doing what I wanted to do. That was a point at really which I started doing what I wanted to do rather than working for someone else. And so personal and business merged. And so this, I think, in a way, is why I can swap from serious to silly, because it's just the same thing. It's not, if I'm being silly, I'm just being silly, and there's no difference between business and personal for me. It's just what I'm just doing stuff, and I'm doing stuff I enjoy.
It's almost like you are that hairstyle, that sometimes that hair is up and you're looking crazy and party, and then sometimes that hair is letting your hair down. But
I'm comfortable with both. I'm comfortable with being either. I'm comfortable with being the serious guy, and I can be the serious guy when I want to.
Yeah,
but
and I'm not saying either of them are kind of insecure or some kind of act.
Sometimes it's nice to be serious. Sometimes it's nice to just have a laugh. So, but why not? I mean,
and twice in the same sentence. Yeah, why
indeed,
not? Yeah,
indeed,
totally. Yeah. No, I think it's certainly in my own case, I've never really wanted to grow up, and I've always quite liked to not give too much of a flying crap about anything, and to just feel I'll get found out one moment or at some point.
Well, you know what? I think, Millie, that's one of the reasons why you and I get on, because we just see life in that similar way. We just,
Yeah, I think taking life just the right amount of seriously, but no more.
Yeah,
certainly my motto. All right, enough about me. What about then your house in Hammersmith that then a few years or decades later becomes, I think, a property portfolio of 100 properties? You've got to flip a lot of houses to get there.
Not quite that many.
All right, but it's in the double figures, isn't it? The number of
no.
properties
So I
that
ended
you've developed or whatever. So
we built my property development company built over 100 properties in London, Gloucestershire, and Kent over the course of maybe a 15-year period or something. And I built over a portfolio of over 50 commercial and residential investment properties. Most of those properties I built up in the first sort of decade of what I was doing. We skipped ahead a bit though, and after I bought that first house and I built up that little bit of equity, I thought, okay, I'm just going to use that to buy some more properties. So I sold the house in Hammersmith. I bought a flat, an ex-council flat actually in Battersea. I then bought another house in Westminster. I then bought another house in Battersea, and so I had those two properties at the same time. I rented out the flat in Westminster. I refurbished it actually, and then I'd lived in it for a while. Then I moved to the terraced house in Battersea, rented out the flat in Westminster for a while, then sold that flat, and then I ended up buying. And so again, I built up a bit of capital through that. I was actually still working at the time, so I was just doing this sort of part-time, on the side, I suppose you could say. And then I ended up buying a house in Gloucestershire, a Grade 2 listed former hunting lodge. That needed a lot of work, and I still have that place. It's called Danby Lodge. I've put it into a trust now, but it's set out in the middle of something like 10,000 acres of forest on its own. It's got a pool. And it's short-term let now when I'm not there. But that sort of period, I went through this period where I was doing property stuff on the side as a sort of a part-time landlord, you could say, I suppose. That was mostly buying properties, refurbishing them, and then either renting them or selling them. But I did that while I was working at BT, and so I sort of went up through the ranks at BT. They put me through an MBA program at a Swiss business school called IMD, and I came out of that business school program looking for. I wanted to use the things that I'd learned, and I struggled to find a role in BT that would allow me to. So I ended up jumping out of BT and going to work for a technology startup near Bristol. Got out of that with a little bit of money, and I then decided to do what I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is start my own property development and investment company. And so I started that company, Melt Property, in 2002. Did that for the best part of 2 decades. But for the last sort of 5 years of doing it, when probably the last 10 years of doing it actually, I really wanted to get back to the technology industry. I got into property because I'd always loved it, and I've always found it interesting. But the thing I loved about it, particularly when I came out of tech, was that it was something tangible. When you're in technology, you're always dealing with things, not always, but most of the time you're dealing with things you don't see. Less so these days, but back then it was networks, it was software. You don't see the thing that you sell a telecommunications network, or you help someone set it up. You don't see it. It's not a physical thing. And I think I've just sort of felt like I wanted to have a more tangible impact on the world. And that's what led me into property. And so I taught myself, essentially, I suppose, how to become a property developer. These days it's much easier to learn how to do that stuff because there's a lot of people on the internet you can talk to and on social media. Back then, there was no internet. Well, not much anyway. There was no social media. That was back in sort of the early 2000s. It was really only just starting. And so I really enjoyed that kind of period of learning how to do that, and that's when I built up most of that investment property portfolio. Probably after 10 years of that, I should have gone straight back to tech. I think I started wanting to get back, but I just didn't quite know how because I've been out of it for 10 years. There was a thing that came along in 2008 called the global financial crisis, which kept my attention tied up for about 3, 4, maybe 5 years. I mean, that was a very difficult period. I had some development property that I held through that period and then developed after it. I suppose I built up a portfolio of investment property, and the fact that interest rates came down was a very beneficial thing for me because the servicing cost on those investment properties came down, and so that gave me an income through that period. But yeah, no, I started about 4 or 5 years ago doing early stage investments in tech companies, and I realised that actually I didn't want to run property development projects anymore. I used to enjoy it when I first started, but they became bigger and bigger, and it just felt like I was a wheel in my own machine that I'd created.
Yeah,
I was running these things, and it was just putting a huge amount of pressure on me. And I realised that what I wanted to do is use the experience that I built up over many years of doing, building and running businesses to help other people build businesses, to help young entrepreneurs with energy. And so I wanted to help them do that and invest in those businesses, and at the same time use that to make the world a better place. One of the things that I started to focus on towards the end of what I was doing in property was sustainable property development. And I think I've carried that same philosophy into what I'm doing with the venture capital fund. But I think technology is different to property in that property is not going to transform the world or transform the future of the human race. Okay, people need it. People need somewhere to live. That's right at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. And it's important to do sustainable property. But technology has the potential to alter the trajectory of the human race. And things, technologically...
For better or for worse as well, isn't it? Yeah.
For better or for worse. And so it's important that technology and investment and venture capital is directed in the right way. Yeah. We don't want investment to be directed into things that ultimately will damage people or cause people's lives to be worse. No, sure. I almost said cause people's wives to be worse, actually, but that's probably a slightly different subject, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's for the next edition.
But no, I do want to... Let me finish this. This is really important to me. For me, I'm really excited about the potential for technology to be used to change the world in a more positive way. For an example of that, one technology like nuclear fusion, if that technology can be brought to a point where it can be commercialized, that could alter the whole trajectory of the climate change discussion. We won't need traditional energy sources anymore because we will have a source of energy that is limitless and doesn't produce any kind of negative emissions. It's also the sort of technology that could take us to other planets. To me, that's super exciting. If I can be involved even in a small way in some of those things that can positively impact the world, I'm super excited about that.
All right, so and that has taken us to where I wanted to go, that transition from property to technology and investment, and we'll hear about your investment fund.
But I wanted to say something. I've always had that view of and vision of what technology can do. I think the best way to think about my foray into property is that it was a break. It was like I just needed a break from all the tech stuff, do something a little bit practical, and then to come back to it. I should have come back to it 10 years ago. I should have come back to it in 2013 after the global financial crisis, or maybe a few years after that. But I didn't, and I'm doing it now, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I love it.
Yeah, it does seem like it. And also, I mean, just before we leave property, though, because it's not to be ignored how important property is, and of course you'll know this, from an investment point of view, but also right at the other end of the property speculation scale, I'm just a little old landlord of a rental property. It's my previous flat that I ended up hanging on to it, and so I moved to my residential property. I never really wanted to have a rental property. I've never seen myself as a landlord. I think, unlike you, I'm not particularly interested in property, but just for many of the reasons you'll know in the market conditions as they have been in the last 10, 15 years, it made more sense to hang on to the rental property and rent it out rather than to sell it. So that's why I hang on to it. But the point being that I see my role as a landlord, I take it very seriously, and this may sound a bit glib or cheesy, especially to some very hard-headed business people who may be listening to this, but primarily I take satisfaction from it because I'm providing people with a home. And I take that very seriously, so if there are issues with the property, or, the boiler breaks or the windows are leaky during the winter, I get those fixed. Partly because it'll just keep the rent coming in, but also because I think these are human beings who are entitled to have a nice home to live in. And so I see that they've placed quite a big burden of trust in me as the provider of that thing, as you say, at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, look, it's funny, what you're saying, I think, reflects a view of landlords that isn't necessarily accurate. It's certainly not how I am as a landlord.
But do you have to divorce the business, though, the hard-headed business, from the kind of touchy-feely, is it like, the emotional thing of thinking, I provided all these homes for people, they have roofs over their heads because of me and my enterprise.
What you're angling at is the assumption that those two are diametrically opposed views, and they're not. It is possible to provide beautiful homes for people and still make money. It's not, the two are not mutually exclusive. And I think the assumption that you have to be hard-headed to be a successful business person is also not necessarily true. I think it's one way of skinning the cat, but the cat can be skinned in other ways. And I think the key to me to being successful in business is working out how to skin that cat in a manner that is socially and environmentally sustainable. That was part of my focus on sustainable property development. Let me give an example of this. This is really important. Somebody who's coming into my venture capital, one of my venture capital funds as a limited partner, does sustainable property development in Africa. He also does sustainable property development in India. The margins that he makes on the sustainable property development he does in Uganda, that's where he's doing it, are something like 50%. That's because nobody else is doing it. And so what the product that he's selling is unique. So he is doing a thing that's good. He's also doing a thing that people want. And if you were to sum up the focus of my venture capital fund in very, very simple terms, it's that. I focus on investing in companies who are producing products and services that meet the demand for what people want, but do it in a socially and environmentally impactful manner. So you get the best of both worlds, and it is possible to get the best of both worlds. There are people who believe that it isn't, but it is. And you just have to focus the investment and work hard to find those things.
So, but a devil's advocate then, what about the competitor who isn't so sustainably aware, takes the easy buck, you're up against them, or, to bring it back to property, what about, just the dodgy landlord who doesn't do any maintenance, doesn't really look after the place? Those tenants, they're still going to pay their rent, so, why be so nice about it, whether you're a landlord or a property developer or a business person, when the competition may not be quite playing by the rules in the same way?
There are a huge number of answers to that question, so let me just try and take a few of them. Firstly, somebody will pay more for a property that's in good condition than one that isn't. you will probably get a better class of tenant, and they'll probably be happier. And if they're happier, they probably won't act like an arsehole. I mean, they probably think you're an arsehole, and that's probably why they're acting like an arsehole. I'm not saying there aren't people out there that are unreasonable. There are, but at the end of the day, if you can develop a relationship with your tenant and you can provide them with something that's nice and good value, and we've always tried to provide properties that are nicer than the average property, because we get better tenants and we have a better relationship with them. I'm not saying that we don't ever have disputes with tenants, or because we do, and it's inevitable when you have a certain number of properties. And some people, as I've said, they're just not reasonable, or they're deceitful, or they don't pay the rent and then they move out, whatever. But so that stuff happens. But to take the example of the guy who's doing the sustainable homes in Uganda, well, what are his competitors going to do to compete with sustainable homes? They can't compete with them. They have to do the same thing. So there is no competition to that as such, apart from someone else doing another sustainable home. I think in a way, with something like that, you're kind of upping the standard for everybody else. You're saying, look, okay, you guys go produce that stuff, but we're doing this, and this is better. And then, the customers come to you because you've got a better product. So what that is competitive advantage. And so that's another thing that we look for in the companies that we invest in. We look for companies with a strong competitive advantage, so that a competitor can't just come along, undercut them, with a shittier product, and then they don't make any money. There has to be some way of protecting their product or service in a manner that allows them to generate excessive profitability, not excessive, but exceptional profitability. That's the best way to put it. Because when we're investing in those companies, that exceptional profitability then drives impact. It enables companies to grow faster and generate more impact. The faster they grow, the more impact they generate. And so the way that we generate impact in the world is by investing in companies that have that strong competitive advantage and are also generating impact. And that really is what underpins the thesis of the venture capital fund.
You can have both, and it can be a good business case. No, absolutely. Well, let's get into the venture capital fund.
But it's about how you focus.
Sure. So Hyperlight Ventures, and help me out here. Treat me like a beginner, because I am. What's the difference between a venture capital fund and private equity?
So those are two terms which are generally used to describe types of fund which are structured in the same way from a legal perspective, but invest in different things. So the structure of a venture capital firm or fund. So the firm will be the operator of the fund, and so you might have a private equity firm that has multiple funds that invest in different things, or a venture capital fund that has multiple funds that invest in, say, you could have an impact fund, you could have a health fund, you could have a fund that focuses on software as a service businesses. So the funds generally are the ones that determine the focus, the investment thesis of the funds which determine the focus. And the legal structure of those is one where you have limited partners. They are effectively the investors in the fund. They provide the majority of the capital that the fund invests. But the fund is run and managed by the venture capital firm. The venture capital firm takes a proportion of the profit that's generated, and also charges a management fee which is effectively around sourcing and managing the investments. But it provides something very important in venture capital, probably less important in private equity, which is something called portfolio diversification. And basically what that means is that the investment is diversified over a sufficient number of investments to ameliorate risk. In venture capital, depending on the stage at which you invest, you could expect up to 90% of the companies that you invest in to go bust, just not exit. That would be at angel stage. At later stages like seed or late seed, you might be up to 80% going bust or 70%. And the trick really is to minimise the number or maximise the number of companies that are successful by carefully selecting them and adding as much value as you can to what they do to increase the chances of them being successful. Private equity is different in that it tends, whereas venture capital invests in early stage companies, generally technology companies, that are expected to grow, if they're successful, to grow stratospherically. So You can get £1 billion exits or £1 billion plus exits, a Google, for example, which will make the venture capital fund hundreds of millions of dollars or pounds. That's balanced against the ones that are written off, and that's why you need the portfolio diversification. You basically balance the wins with the losses, and you make exceptional returns by doing so, if you're good at it. Private equity tends to invest in established businesses. So again, private equity funds have different focuses. Sometimes the focus might be, for example, you look at a particular industry, you see that there are a lot of small firms in that industry, and you can see that by taking 10 of these small firms, you buy them, you stick them together into one big firm. That one big firm will be worth a lot more than the 10 small firms, because it can achieve some degree of market dominance in a particular part of that industry. So you buy them, you stick them all together, and then you sell that bigger organisation to somebody else who wants to buy it, or you float it on the stock market. You could also have recovery situations where you go around buying companies that are in some sort of trouble. They just need a bit of funding, and you get them to a point where they're successful and you sell them on. Or you might have other sorts of situations in private equity where you see companies in a particular state where maybe they've got too much cash, or they've got some assets, or they're not nimble enough. They've got maybe a tech business within them. You can pull out the tech business, you sell the tech business separately, and then you get the main business focused on a particular thing, and you build value. So in essence, private equity is more about it's more about buying companies, existing companies or assets, which are unlikely to go bust because they're fairly well established, and making them worth more. Venture capital is about investing in early stage companies that somebody has just set up, and helping those companies grow into significant sized organisations. So they are quite different, although the structure of the funds is quite similar. The business is totally different.
Okay, so what is it?
And so the reason you don't need that same degree of portfolio diversification actually is because the chances of each of your investments going bust is much less, if that makes any sense. In venture capital, it's critical, because there's potentially much higher upside, but you've got to diversify across a certain number of investments. Otherwise, the risk of losing all your money is too great.
I get it. So what is? So you're setting up a new venture capital fund. I wouldn't even know where you start to set one up. But what's the kind of objective of the fund? What kind of businesses are you interested in?
So our strapline for the fund is that we invest in companies or ventures that harness the power of markets to make the world a better place. If you drill down into that a little bit, we expand that by talking about companies that create positive social and environmental impact. And really, what that's about is, having observed that a significant amount of money is being poured into ESG investment. So ESG is environmental and social governance. That's something that companies are focusing on more and more, partly because they want to, but partly because government regulation is driving them to. Think about things like carbon credits, for example, and carbon emissions. So that's one thing that's driving companies to be more environmentally and socially responsible. But there are many things. But also consumer preferences are driving in that same direction. What that's doing, all that kind of pressure of money and regulation and demand, is it's creating a significant demand for products and services that create social and environmental impact, or for technology that enables greater social and environmental impact. And so we are investing in companies that serve that demand, that have a product or service that delivers positive social or environmental impact.
At what stage are we at the moment? The fund's, is it up and running already, the fund?
No.
Okay, so you're still in that process. So when will it actually start?
So we're aiming to close the fund to do a first close on the fund at the end of June.
Oh, quite soon.
Yeah, so
maybe even by the time this podcast goes out. So if it's the end of June, we can find out if that's happened. Yeah. So are you excited then? Your face lit up a little bit when we were talking about the first close. I think you're enjoying this, Evan Maindonald. I think you're having a good time. I'm enjoying it a lot, but it is hard. Yeah, man. I'm not going to say it's the hardest thing I've ever done. I don't think it is, but
I've heard somebody say, and I think this is true, that raising a venture capital fund or getting into venture capital is harder than getting into Harvard or Stanford. And I think it's true. Maybe not raising a venture capital fund is, but it is one of those. You said I wouldn't know where to get started. Well, about a year ago, I didn't either. I didn't even realise it was something I really would be able to do, although it is something I've been wanting to do. I've tried to get into venture capital in some form or other a number of times over the course of my life or my career, and it's very difficult. It's always been a very closed, let's say, industry, dominated by, a few people who just were in the right place or managed to get their foot in the door or whatever. A bit maybe like broadcasting was in the days when you first started doing broadcasting, hard to get in, right? So my initial thought was that I would focus on early stage angel investing initially, but I then realised that it would be possible to start to actually raise my own venture capital fund. I started working with a Silicon Valley based organisation called VC Labs. It's part of Founders Institute. They run an accelerator that helps people start their own venture capital funds. They have a fantastic vision, which is really about democratising venture capital, opening it up and enabling it to be spread more widely around the world. At the moment, it's fairly well concentrated in Silicon Valley and a bit in places like London or Bangalore or some other cities in the US. But it's pretty hard to raise tech investment in Ghana or Nigeria. I mean, there is a bit of a burgeoning market in Nigeria. They recently helped accelerate the first venture capital fund ever in Mongolia. I think that's very important. That mission is very important. They're very much about ethical venture capital as well, making sure that venture capital is deployed for good in the world. That ties in with what I want to do. And so I really do have this my vision for what it is that I want to do is really about spreading that technology investment around the world and enabling companies in lots of different places to have access to capital so that they can innovate and they can grow and they can all help make the world a better place. We need venture capital in Africa. We need more venture capital in Asia. We need venture capital in South America. We need it in New Zealand. And I guess being the sort of internationalist, I suppose, that I am, where I really want to go with this is once I've raised my first fund, I want to start doing funds in other parts of the world with partners. I want to do a fund in New Zealand. I want to do a fund in Latin America. Well, I want to do a fund in Africa. So I'm going to go there. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So you're working effing hard, I think it's fair to say. So let's talk about how you unwind, including with your brilliant dogs, Brian and Arthur. But you're into your wine, aren't you?
Yeah, I do like wine. Yeah,
and quite on quite a serious level, as in you've got a cellar, haven't you? You got a couple of cellars.
I've got 3.
Okay, fair enough. 3 it is. I stand duly corrected. So where does all this come from, your love of wine?
Again, it seems to go back to my teenage years. I just kind of, I think it was a James Bond film. It's the one where he's got a bottle of Dom Perignon in the middle of the console of an Aston Martin DB5.
I remember that.
And I was like, oh, that's very cool. I want to know about wine. I think I was inspired by James Bond. Might have been Sean Connery back then, right? Or was it him? Or?
I think it was the Sean Connery era. Yeah, of course.
But anyway, I kind of got that thing. I was like, okay, wine's sophisticated. You want to understand wine. And so I started to learn a little bit about it, and I realised that the depth of the subject it's a very deep. It's
phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those things where the more you know, the less you know. But anyway, when I came to the UK, so one of the things that I kind of dabbled in at one point was e-commerce. So about the time, if you remember, in the 90s, there was this whole .com boom. I started with a couple of friends of mine, a company called New World Wines, and we were importing wines from New Zealand and Australia and selling them in the UK. And I think at that point I thought I knew quite a bit about wine, but I really didn't know that much. I knew a fair amount about New Zealand and Australian wines. I know a bit, and I thought they were much better than European wines. So I think the attitudes to that have turned around completely. And so anyway, we started importing wines from small boutique wineries in Australia and New Zealand into the UK. We actually had a shop in Wandsworth, and we were selling them online. We had a website, and I suppose we were trying to raise investment for that. I think we got to the whole thing a bit too late, and we were probably in the wrong place, mind you. And that was late '90s. People were raising money for all sorts of things for that were just absolutely ridiculous. If we'd been in Silicon Valley, I'm sure we'd all be billionaires by now. But anyway, we ended up closing that business down, and we had a bit of a stock of wine at the end. So, which was the business didn't need anymore because it wasn't operating. So that's what started my wine collection, but also being involved with that business, I properly started to learn about wine, about the different grapes, about the French regions, about the appellation system, and so that kicked me into a deeper interest in wine, and I started buying wine for investment. And so, because I like wine, my investment philosophy in wine is basically this: I buy wines that I like, but I also buy wines that I think will go up in price. And if they don't go up in price, I drink them. And if they do go up in price, I either sell all of them or I sell maybe half and then drink the rest. So, yeah, I've just built up a cellar over time of wine that is just stuff that I like, and so I've got a cellar at the place that we live in Cambridgeshire, and I've got another cellar at another property, and the rest of the stuff is in Bond. So I do have quite a wine collection, and I have really I think come to understand wine properly and appreciate it. I used to only really like big heavy reds. Probably my favourite red wine now is Pinot Noir. I'm a big fan of red Burgundy. I love German Riesling. But I think I really have an appreciation of the whole spectrum of wine now. Let me just say one thing about wine. Wine is always better when you drink it with other people. Having drank many bottles of wine on my own, and I'm not saying that you can't enjoy a nice bottle of wine on your own, of course you can. But there's something about drinking wine with other people that is magical, and especially if the other people you're drinking with also really appreciate the wine. I think some of the best times I've ever had are just sitting around with a bunch of friends drinking a lovely bottle of wine. I think I said, I am something of a hedonist or a maximizer, so I like my wine, I love my food, and for me there's nothing better than having lovely food with great wine. Those two things go together, with friends. Those three things, and friends that appreciate the wine, those three things together, to me, probably are the best time I could ever have.
there we go.
Yeah.
All righty. I suppose, like, finally, what's the last thing if you had to fit in one more thing that you've never done before, kind of on your bucket list, as it were, what's the one thing that you haven't done yet that you really do need to do before the Grim Reaper comes? Legal or illegal?
Wow, there are so many things that I could put on that list. I've got it. I know what I want.
I thought, give him time.
1961 Romani Conti Grand Cru. Just drink a double magnum of that. That'll be fine.
And in what setting?
At the vineyard.
Oh,
it's impossible. Nobody can do. Well, very few people ever get to do that. You can't get into the vineyard, and the wine is stratospherically expensive. But yeah, if I could,
if you had the dosh,
or Lafitte Rothschild, or
here we go. We could fade out
Sassicaia,
on this, couldn't we?
Tignanello.
All right, and so let's.
Masetto.
Oh,
another great Merlot.
What's all right? So final question then. So what's the best day of your life that you can remember?
Wow, I've had many great days in my life. We talked earlier about shades of grey, and I don't know that I can answer that question without maybe just kind of getting into shades of grey. But I'll tell you one day that I really remember, and it will always stick with me. My partner and I, Zoe, were in the Maldives, and I remember we were sitting on some nets just over the ocean, having cocktails, and it was just a lovely time. Just one of those lovely times when you're sitting there, you're relaxed, you're having a drink, you're in the perfect place with the perfect person. There's nothing more I like than doing that.
Oh, that's the ending I was looking for. There we go. Evan Maindonald, what a pleasure it's been. I've learnt so much. Let's drink some wine.
Yeah, let's go and do that. And listen, thank you. Thank you for being such a great interviewer. I've really enjoyed this chat. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it, and I really appreciate you.
Oh, well, may I reciprocate as well?
Yeah.
I'm
looking forward to some nice wine tonight as well. Yeah,
we will do.
Yeah, I bought a few lovely ones. So
yeah, all right, we'll try them.
Looking forward
Great.
to it.
That is it. There'll be more in the next edition of the Adventures in Venture podcast. He is Evan Maindonald. I'm Gareth Mitchell. Thanks for listening.
See ya.